reality of the occupation in general and of the continuing war.
One of the things that came out of 1968 was that Colombia disassociated itself from the IDA and cut off its research in terms of classified projects. By 1968, 48% of Colombia's research budget was devoted to military-related research. What has essentially happened has been that Colombia has outsourced this research. So whereas Colombia once produced research for the government in exchange for, of course, enormous sums of government funding, today Colombia instead invests in private companies who carry out this research, and then those investment dollars are now what funds our non-military research.
There's no talk of divestment, there's no talk of Iraq. It is treated as a foregone era.
It's 40 years of 68, 5 years of Iraq. It's also 60 years of the Nakba in Palestine. And these are all, and it's interesting that out of all of these, the 68 is what is gaining, in some sense, the most traction. And I think on this campus, it is this sort of moment that we can look at and say, this was possible. And not only to then be nostalgic about it, but then to create the conditions of possibility where once again we can feel strongly enough to make it possible today on the issues that matter today.
Our overall aim is to reclaim this campus as a space where occupation, colonization, and war are simply not acceptable.
We've received a lot of support, a lot of people have contacted us, and it's very heartening. But I would also just urge people to think about not only what happened, but what can happen and what we can make possible. And I think that is the legacy. If there is going to be a legacy, that should be the legacy.
Students at Columbia University yesterday, as all the commemoration activities of 68 were taking place, talking about their concerns today. Throughout the week, they have been reading the names of the dead from the Iraq War. And yesterday, I think they'd only made it up through 2006, yet they had been reading for days. Bill Sales.
Yes, I think it's important to recognize that the community will speak this weekend because Columbia is more of a threat to the integrity of West Harlem and Harlem today than it ever was in 1968. And we should understand that protest is alive and well, and there will be a march on the campus. This commemoration so far has included academicians and some, superannuated activists, but it will, before the week is out, include a substantial number of very angry community people.
I'd like to ask Tom, there's a school of thought, even among some of the folks who used to participate in SDS and others, that the protests of that year, like Columbia and then later on at the Democratic Convention in Chicago, actually created a right-wing reaction that led to a lot of the problems that have since accumulated in American society from the election of Richard Nixon on, that in essence it was actually counterproductive. Todd Gitlin, obviously, is one of the main proponents of this.
Sorry to hear that.
What your perspective on that kind of analysis?
Well, the student movement and the civil rights movement, anti-war movements were reactions to a right-wing ascendancy, white supremacy in the South, an invasion of Vietnam after a president said he wasn't going to send American troops there. He went and sent 150,000 troops 6 months after he'd been elected, and those are the kind of factors that are left out of this narrative. I think this strike at Columbia was a strike heard around the world. There were student strikes in, of course, Mexico, all across Latin America, all across Asia, Africa, Europe. Columbia might have been more famous because it touched the nerve endings of the New York Times and the media capital of the United States, but there must have been, give me a suggestion, 100, 200 campus strikes, and by 1972, universities were simply on strike en masse. The semester didn't end. Now, I would say that it was a failure of Democratic Party liberalism, to be specific, because they were, as some are still today, so wrapped up in the Cold War, in military spending, in anti-communism, that they perceived Vietnam as being a threat to our way of life, as being an extension of Soviet imperialism. They refused to understand that it was a nationalist movement that was very difficult to defeat by foreign occupation. And it was a Democratic Party war from 1965 to 1968. So what were we to do? We couldn't become Republicans. There was no party for us, as John Lewis said.
Recreate go ahead, Gus.
There's also another factor that's never taken into consideration in terms of our historical memory, which is it wasn't SDS and anti-war activities that elected Richard Nixon. It was almost 10 million white votes who voted for George Wallace. I mean, Humphrey lost to Nixon by really a handful of votes. Wallace carried 5 southern states. In 3 of those states, it was Wallace first, Humphrey second, and Nixon third. So it was a white backlash, not to the anti-war movement, but a white backlash to the black liberation struggle that really tipped the election. And everybody who blames the protesters in Chicago overlooks that important ingredient.
We're going to have to leave it there. Bill, 5 seconds.
I was just going to say that we defeated Goldwater in 1964 in the hope that we would prevent an escalation in Vietnam, and it was Johnson, a Democrat, who involved us massively there. So I don't know whether party politics completely explains the fundamental reactionary nature of the United States.
Bill Sales, want to thank you for being with us. Gus Reichbach, now judge in Brooklyn. Tom Hayden, his new book out is called Writings for a Democratic Society. And, of course, Juan. Will be tomorrow, Tom Hayden and I, at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books tonight in Santa Barbara, tomorrow night in Los Angeles, and we go on to Minneapolis and St. Louis and Fresno. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Check our website, democracynow.org. Thanks for joining us.